I was always a Porsche fan. 2 reasons. First, the Steve McQueen classic, Le Mans. Second, EA's Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed that cataloged the German manufacturer's output. These 2 define parts of my childhood, and yet, this instilled bias didn't stop me marveling at Ferraris like everyone else on Earth. Ferrari has stood tall for over 70 years, and for most of that period, the few who could match the Italians in performance will never match the power of its brand. Ferrari is synonymous with automobiles, like Ducati is to motorcycles and Rolex is to watches, though I doubt there's any Rolex-themed condoms. With a brand that's as contagious and compelling as this, it's only natural that there's no shortage of Ferraris in video games. Licensing agreements led to them being annoyingly absent in many popular titles, but today, it's almost harder to escape them. Thing is, when it comes to the total number of Ferrari-exclusive video games, there's about as many South Park, Bratz, and Cars games, which considering how much longer and more famous Ferrari is than all of those combined, is strange. You'd think that if the brand's been printed on virtually everything, a few more would display it loudly and proudly rather than a tiny logo amongst dozens in the legal disclaimer. And that makes me want to delve into the ones that do. Except the 1988 DOS game, I don't have that kind of patience. This raises a question though. Does OutRun count? Ferrari isn't in the title, and Sega weren't permitted to feature the now iconic Testarossa. But the companies resolved their issues, Sega paid the fee, and there's over a dozen Ferraris in Coast to Coast, so it's worth at least an honorable mention. OutRun could be seen as the Tetris of driving games, with a timeless design that's been retained for over 30 years, with the last game to be released coast to coast, featuring the landscapes, hazards, and gameplay of that arcade original. The differences between these entries aren't through changes, but additions. OutRun 2, which Coast to Coast is built on, obviously added 3D graphics, but also precise drifting, vehicle categories, and the best way to play, Heart Attack mode, adding a variety of challenges to be completed during the journey with your bloodthirsty girlfriend. Really though, these hilarious requests are part of the charm, and while there's aspects of this game's style I don't care for, particularly the music, there's no question it doesn't give OutRun an immediate identity. 2-seater Ferraris blasting high-pitched pop crap soaring by mountains growing from molehills with perfect flips, endless drifts, and angry bimbos. It's all OutRun. What isn't OutRun is Coast to Coast Career Mode. The game itself includes OutRun 2's single player, but the supposed main draw was its self-titled mode, requiring players to complete individual tasks, which isn't necessarily a problem. It's just that most of the time these tasks involve merely racing other drivers, which by the creator's own admission isn't what OutRun's about. The AI rarely fights back, courses are just closed-up versions of ones you know, and early events are epically easy, making me just want to stick to arcade and Heart Attack mode. OutRun's a rhythm game under a Ferrari cloak, which is why the game's best played in environments where that's the focus rather than just being faster than the other guy. Other games focusing on that aspect means there's always a place for OutRun, and irrespective of the Ferrari license, I believe Sega deserves another crack at this series, if only to give PC players a version that doesn't require fan patches. Their next Ferrari game is more dated, but rather shockingly, not by much considering its aspirations, and for those that peruse the arcades in 1999, has an immediately recognizable sound. Most arcade games had a gimmick to make themselves immediately stand out, which often translated to the cabinet itself. And with Sega's Ferrari F355 Challenge, it was the built-in triple-screen display, the sim racer's ideal choice for immersion prior to VR. And that right there should tip off why this game was one of the most unique in the arcades. The company known for Sonic the Hedgehog was quite prolific when it came to driving games, releasing one every other second it seemed. Daytona USA, Rally Championship, Touring Car, GT, Super GT, it was endless. But in all those releases, none fell into the simulation category. And why would they? Arcades were the home of pick up and play. But having owned a Ferrari after releasing OutRun, Yu Suzuki wanted to capture the experience of really driving one, and pulled it off so successfully, Ferrari themselves ordered a custom cabinet. Age has only put into perspective just how talented the Sega staff were. Grand Prix Legends is undeniably more sophisticated, and Gran Turismo overwhelms it in content, but when it comes to making pure racing challenging but accessible, high speed but manageable, 355 Challenge is one of the peaks of this genre. Firstly, the title vehicle wasn't selected at random. This tuned 355 is the perfect vehicle to make a sim-based racer approachable to newcomers, as it's one of the best handling cars Ferrari ever made, and unlike their supercars, not powered by a whale-sized engine. Racing games have two built-in difficulty settings: the game and the vehicle. The latter of which in this case was firmly set to easy, which was good because the game wasn't. Players have to master cornering speeds, braking zones, and consistency to reach the podium. Even with all the assists, late braking's punished, cutting curbs will slide your vehicle, and getting too aggressive with the engine leaves one facing the opposite direction, as is right for a sim. What's remarkable is this game's feel, and the struggle to quantify this is seen in the game's coverage, as none of the reviews I read and watched go in depth, but I believe the magic is in this game's physics. In Gran Turismo, your car is heavy because it's a car, and to counter the challenge of controlling this brick, it's grippy. And this can be felt in almost all games aiming for believable physics, like Sega GT or Forza. Except 355 Challenge, which does the opposite. Your vehicle weighs as much as a soap bar and slides like one when giving it some stick, which is so much fun. Darting between opponents, navigating chicanes, and twitching the wheel at just the right angle through a high-speed turn carries with it the sense of speed and flow of an arcade racer, but with the precision of a sim. It helps too that the game does everything technically and creatively to reinforce that excitement. Its top-notch graphics for the time ran at a native 60 FPS for the best control. The car vibrates at speed, and sound design is phenomenal. I'll never get tired of that engine, or this car, or these tracks. Truly, there is only one fault I can fairly give this game, and that's the collision system. Or lack thereof. Simply gracing the concrete doesn't damage your car or slow it down, it brings it to a complete halt. For a driving game this good to give each wall a magnet pull and flip a coin per vehicle collision that decides who gets screwed is quite baffling in retrospect and immensely infuriating in the moment. Though there is the flip side to this, where contact with opponents anywhere else generates an unstoppable force field that is admittedly quite cathartic to abuse. My theory being Suzuki and his team spent so much time nailing the game's driving model that the actual racing came in at the last minute. Because even the AI doesn't seem to know how to respond to accidents. After crashing at Laguna Seca, the AI behind me slammed on their brakes and spun off the infamous corkscrew, where it remained until the next lap when another driver unaware of the other's existence drove straight into them. This does have the unintentional benefit of making races tense, as you're never comfortable using the old bumper car trick, but you could kick a horse in rage after losing races because the beep boop AI sent you off course. But even with those quibbles, I caught myself returning to this game far more than necessary for the video, and that's not nostalgia speaking. Challenge was one of my least played arcade games, as I recall Vancouver's Palladium only having one, plus the Digital Circus had more extravagant machines, and I'm really kicking myself for it now, because looking back, this game was easily the best racer there. It's a bit of a shame Sega no longer has rights to the Ferrari license, because this game deserves a remaster. You'd barely need to do anything. Unlock resolutions, fix collisions, add force feedback, and I'd buy it in a heartbeat. You'd think there'd be a sequel adding content, features, and refinements, but the only Ferrari Challenge 2 released was merely an arcade port of its console counterparts, and it would be the only Ferrari game beyond OutRun until 9 years later. Ferrari Challenge was brought back to the masses, subtitled Trofeo Pirelli. While Activision printed copies in North America, the game was published by System 3 and developed by Eutechnyx in the UK. Now I know what many of you are thinking. Why does Eutechnyx sound so familiar? Perhaps it's for the best then that this game doesn't carry Suzuki's legacy. It does mention the 355 challenge in loading screens, and you can disable assist during races, but other than that, Trofeo Pirelli has no connection to Sega's arcade classic. And surprisingly, it's not bad on the surface, featuring dozens of Ferraris ranging from the 355 successors, historic racers, and one of the fastest supercars ever conceived. They're driven on a variety of circuits ranging from European staples such as Monza and Spa to American road courses in Homestead in California, giving you lots to learn about the approach to every corner, and you'll need to because the challenge isn't just in its name. Vehicles slide about, opponents are quick, and there's no retry button in the core modes. striking the fear of God into you when braking late into a corner, and that's likely to happen as braking is perhaps the greatest challenge. Reaching the podium and not knowing the circuit are almost mutually exclusive, where most games just let players get away with slamming the brakes every corner. So it's got tension, variety, and a dream collection of cars. What's this game's Achilles heel? What's wrong with it? Let's go down the list. To start small, presentation. This game defines the word serviceable, outputting realistic graphics, interior views, and subtle details, which seems impressive, except Gran Turismo 5 Prologue did these better at double the frame rate 1 year prior, while having more personality in its menus, loading screens, and music, where Trofeo Pirelli is seriously lacking. Loading screens are pervasive, all but one song is tolerable, and the menus are poorly designed. Buying a Ferrari isn't done with a showroom button. Instead, you've got to leave whichever screen you're on, go to the showroom, load the showroom, and then buy a Ferrari in the showroom. Want to adjust the difficulty? Simply quit the entire race, load, and go to the options screen featuring everything else you can customize during a race. I can deal with the occasional hitch or frame rate drop, but incompetence is so much worse when it creates inconvenience. Now, upon starting the F430 to unlock courses and earn credits, handling's heavier than you'd expect, but subtly. The characteristics of this light sports car are mostly intact and fun to drive through the game's courses with traction similar to the previous game. Heavier front-engine vehicles is where this starts to change. My mother's Volvo took corners with more grip and precision than this game's 550, making its races tougher than the near 800 horsepower FXX. Some may say making a Ferrari feel like a Ford Pinto isn't an inherent fault, and technically they're correct. It's massively disappointing and slims down the list of desirable vehicles, but so what? Just drive these pigs to unlock the stallions. The problem is AI seems to be unaffected by a vehicle's characteristics. They'll drive a 550 in the rain like an Ariel Atom in the summer, which is why the FXX events are easier. This vehicle's low weight, grip, and monstrous engine let you get the power down early enough to overtake opponents that behave like slot cars, even more so than Sega's Classic. Now, being most AIs in games aren't exactly deep blue, it wouldn't be so bad if the lack of polish hadn't made this one of the most inconsistent games I've ever played. Drivers behind the podium flip a coin to decide letting you through or slamming on the brakes while blocking. They hold on to said brakes through corners despite you not being able to. They even overtly teleport on the map, at one point vanishing completely, forcing a restart of my half-an-hour trophy.
What is this?
And yet, despite everything, I can see why this game generated 2 glorified expansions. Because when running the right vehicle on the right track, Eutechnyx managed to take me back to the years spent with Gran Turismo, playing bumper cars on tight circuits, always chasing that next reward. But not only was GT already becoming dated at this point, there's just so many oversights in a game with no personality or identity. Supercar Challenge's similarity to this game showed Ferraris were the only thing making it stand out, and when half of them are a chore to drive, there's little strength in that. If you were to ask me prior to playing these games which would be superior, a fully funded PS3 title or a 64 megabyte download from Ferrari's website, I know which answer would have surprised me more. Between the release of Eutechnyx's output, the manufacturer themselves uploaded a free simulator developed by Cinetech, with plans to expand its roster of 3 vehicles to Ferrari's whole roster of production cars, as well as online play featuring exclusive prizes for the best drivers. Those updates never came to be and the game was subsequently dropped, but being free continues to float around and question Eutechnyx's ability. Because despite its technology being lifted from the rather mediocre World Racing series, Cinetech managed to focus their efforts and program a handling model that beautifully straddles the line between realism and accessibility. It's similar to Sega's efforts with light vehicles that drift around corners without sacrificing control, and even the heavier front-engine Ferraris are a blast to drive. The AI is less obnoxious and more believable, varying up their pathways, avoiding the player when possible, and making mistakes. Mugello is the game's lone circuit, but has lots of enjoyment in the signature straights and mixture of cornering speeds. There's even mods letting you increase the AI on screen and add vehicles. The brief time spent exhausting this game's limited but engaging sandbox was more enjoyable than all my time with Trofeo Pirelli. And makes me wonder that instead of a mediocre Mercedes game or budget series based on a German cop drama, perhaps Ferrari should have commissioned Cinetech over the now infamous UK developer. But that never happened, as for their next game, they would turn to local talent. Ferrari's idea of hosting online competitions in a simulation was made into a game the following year called Virtual Academy. Let's watch the trailer to get a sense of what it's like.
Your car. Fiorano, Mugello, Nürburgring. 3 circuits, 1 car.
It's a budget price time trial. Reminds me of a Lexus ad that said of its latest vehicle,
"It changes everything."
That is a big claim, isn't it?
Now, besides that, I'd love to tell you what this game is like, but I can't as it's completely unplayable. I've got plenty of games you can't buy anymore, builds never intended to resurface, and some I can't delve into. But Virtual Academy has surpassed my search engine capabilities for a few reasons. First, despite only being able to run time trials in a single vehicle at launch, it was always online. Second, once Ferrari used up its grand prizes for the quickest drivers, they decided server upkeep wasn't worth funding anymore and pulled it from their website. Third, even those who purchase the game and its DLC are unable to play it as it requires online verification. And either due to sophistication within the game's encryption or lack of interest from the public, there's no cracked version that's playable offline, at least to my knowledge. It is a case study in the negatives of our live service world, and those that want to play what was heralded at the time as one of the most advanced simulators in the world have zero opportunity to do so. Luckily, you can get an approximation as the game is developed by the makers of Assetto Corsa, where you can take Ferrari's F1 car officially or through mods. Still, it seems when commissioning studios rather than developers coming to them, Ferrari only squandered their potential. All they asked of some of the most talented racing developers in the world was to replicate 3 cars and tracks for time trials, while still contracting the developers of Pimp My Ride in Asphalt. Thankfully, Ferrari's next game wouldn't be handed to a B team, even if the same can't be said about the franchise it entered. Now, I don't mean to undermine Test Drive's significance. The original and its sequel were pioneers, instrumental to the racing genre, but the 20 games it spawned lost all identity upon the new millennium. In 15 months, 4 Test Drive games were released, ranging from hideously dated arcade racers to one of the most acclaimed titles in gaming history and a re-released Need for Speed game. It's a franchise in name only, so don't let the prefix fool you, because Ferrari Racing Legends was made by Project Cars developer Slightly Mad Studios and carries all the characteristics from their previous series, Need for Speed Shift. Distorted engines, gnarly tire screeches, a tremendous sense of speed, and the feeling of holding on to these horses for dear life. As a Slightly Mad fan, this is right up my alley. Ferraris have never sounded nor felt so visceral, even beyond their exclusives. The presentation sells their immense power, while the handling's mixture of arcade and simulation design lets you toss them around for fun before learning how to elegantly maximize their potential, making each Ferrari feel as good as they're supposed to in a game that houses the greatest collection of them ever put to a disc, spanning 60 years of Italian heritage with everything you'd want, along with a few surprises. Ferrari's original GT, special editions, track day conversions, F1 cars of every period. It's mouth-watering for gearheads, along with a good track selection featuring classics like 80s Hockenheim, Monaco, and most important to me, the Nürburgring. Plus, running on Slightly Mad's technology, it even holds up graphically with epically detailed vehicle models, lavish interiors, and gorgeous lighting. In content, function, and the sheer thrill of driving these magnificent machines, Racing Legends is one of the best games to be ruined. You see, all those Ferraris and all those tracks need to be unlocked through a multi-era campaign, just like my childhood, only you don't progress by purchasing vehicles, you instead complete a series of challenges, 216 of them to be precise. On paper, this sounds like a wealth of content, hours of gameplay, hundreds of missions, and dozens of cars to collect. So let's run through the opening levels. Win 1950s Silverstone. Heart-stopping. Drive Monza in Ferrari's original F1 car. Dreamlike. Win 1950s Silverstone in a slower vehicle. Okay. Win 1950s Silverstone in a similar vehicle. Drive at Monza in a slower vehicle. What the fuck? It's not an exaggeration to say that this is reflective of the entire campaign. Missions can have upwards of 9 events in a single vehicle, and then there's the pacing. In this modern tier, the second series plops you into an F333, one of the fastest vehicles in the game, and your reward for finishing multiple 10-lap races in it is a 9-event season in the F355 Challenge before another 9-series event back in the prototype that was already faster. The game's fetish of booting you between face-bending racers and roadsters is chronic. The F430 challenge is driven after spending a league in the FXX. The Silver Era's F1 events precede a tuned F40. The second event in the game puts you into a Formula 1 car, followed up by the game's slowest vehicle. And yet, that's not the worst part. Shift 2 Unleashed had this bug where the AI would start like snails off the grid, letting you bypass them in 4 corners, despite being reasonably quick most of the time. In Racing Legends, that oddity is the norm. Even on the highest difficulty, I consistently place 10, 20, 30, sometimes 40 seconds ahead of the next driver. And for reference, that was me in Grand Prix Legends. Regardless of track, vehicle, or conditions, the AI's pathetic speed makes for the 1-2 punch of hundreds of races that not only take 25 hours to grind through, but with all of those hours spent not even racing. I'm astonished the studio whose next project would be lauded for its flexibility and player agency in the career mode could vomit such disease-ridden filth. Having spent one afternoon struggling to sustain myself through Monza in a slower vehicle than my first drive, I completed the event to see the next one was an exact copy. No new objectives, vehicles, layout, or opponents. Just a copy. So I finally did what I should have done from the start. Download a save file, and drive the Nürburgring in John Surtees's F1 car. And I recommend it's what you do because despite this being possibly the angriest I've gotten while making a video, there is enjoyment to be had in this game. Not racing due to the AI and definitely not within the career mode. But as a time trial Ferrari expansion to Need for Speed Shift, it's got a lot to offer, and I won't be surprised if I come back just to tear around Germany's golden track. For the majority watching though, you're better off acquiring the mods or DLC in mechanically and creatively superior games. But something about that bothers me. It comes back to something mentioned at the start, Ferrari's brand. In the movie Rush, there's a scene where Formula 1 driver Niki Lauda, God rest him, is testing Ferrari's latest vehicle and says,
It's terrible. Drives like a pig.
Oh, you can't say that.
Why not? It's a Ferrari.
There it is. These packs aren't sold to enhance gameplay or deliver a new experience to players. They're sold because
It's a Ferrari.
And you know what? I'm part of the problem. Next sale I ended up with these pieces of content, and I don't regret their purchase as Ferrari do make some of the world's greatest cars. It's just that, is this really the best we can do? Are there no greater aspirations beyond buying DLC packs for whichever racer builds an audience? It doesn't bring a new experience to them. There's dozens of supercar makers in the world. A lot of them are Italian. There's faster racing cars. Adding Ferraris to a game is neat, but nothing more. Sega captured the pleasure of driving them 20 years ago, and it was because Yu Suzuki wanted to share his driving privilege with the world in a manner that hadn't been done at the time. Meanwhile, Ferrari themselves haven't matched that execution, let alone raised their ambition. Look, Porsche Unleashed is undeniably a nostalgic memory for me, but it is the reason why I find Ferrari's video gaming ventures to utterly lack the passion, creativity, and craft of their cars. That game stands as one of the most unique in Need for Speed's history. No other had you maintaining damaged vehicles not only through leagues but eras with their own cars, songs, menus, and atmosphere. And I suspect that's because it was pushed by imaginative game developers, not a car manufacturer using up another branded condom. Ferrari has the technological genius and eye for beauty to match its boastfulness in cars, but in video games, they've got 2 arcade classics conceived by someone else and nothing since. Despite having the funding, pedigree, story, and works of art to do so much more. When can we get Raycevick merch? It already exists. If Wario is a libertarian, then is Waluigi a male feminist? He's the feminist. Look at that mustache. It's one of trust. If I buy opening night tickets, will you go see the Sonic movie with me? If they kept the original face, I would have said yes. Franchises that change it up too much. Brothers in Arms, because it changed directions so violently the Furious 4 never even got made due to fan backlash. Thoughts on Splitgate? Love it! Though I have a feeling the community's skill is going to leave me far in the dust. Do you have any beef with strategy games, and if so, what do you dislike about them? I'm someone that loves games with a sense of direct control, the character, vehicle, or device doing exactly what I tell it to do when I tell it to do it, ideally. Strategy games take this to a grand scale, but me personally too often feel like your actions are dependent on the AI's execution. And I emphasize feel to acknowledge that this is the irrational caveman part of my brain talking. But when in a gunfight, for instance, and I see my AI troops missing, it drives me up the wall because I can't help but feel like if I were in direct control, the battle would go in a much different direction, or I could at least take responsibility for its failure. Obviously, these things are done for balancing reasons, and gun battles and strategy games are only a visual representation of in-depth systems behind the scenes. I'd just rather play a game where any lack of visual logic or consistency is overshadowed by the immersion of being the person rather than watching them. I should mention the context of ordering and influencing people who themselves have their own agency, flaws, and quirks is why I enjoyed Darkest Dungeon so much more compared to games like XCOM, despite being even more randomized. It was the game's context of hiring mercenaries who are in it for themselves as much as you are that made me more accepting of it, which is why context is one of the most important things for a video game to establish. Sorry, I just realized how much of a mouthful this answer was.